Shattered Innocence, A Son's Vengeance. Part 1. Tranquil Waters. In the sleepy town of Maplewood, where autumn leaves crunched underfoot and neighbors still exchanged freshly baked pies, the Richardsons were considered the perfect family. Thomas Richardson, a soft-spoken accountant with kind eyes and a ready smile, had built a life that most would envy. His wife, Eleanor, with her captivating beauty and charm, was the social butterfly of their community. And then there was their son, Ethan, a bright 12-year-old with his father's gentle nature and his mother's striking blue eyes. Their Tudor-style home on Willow Street, with its white picket fence and blooming gardens, was the manifestation of the American dream. On weekends, Thomas could be found teaching Ethan how to throw a baseball in their backyard, while Eleanor watched from the porch, her melodious laughter carrying through the air. "Dad, you think I'll make the team this year?" Ethan asked one Sunday afternoon, his face flushed with exertion and hope. Thomas ruffled his son's hair, a gesture that always made Ethan feel safe. "With that arm? They'd be crazy not to pick you, champ." From the porch, Eleanor called out, "Dinner's ready, my boys." Her voice was honey-sweet, and Ethan never tired of hearing it. As they gathered around the oak dining table that evening, saying grace as they always did, Ethan couldn't imagine a life more perfect than this. His father's steady presence, his mother's nurturing love, these were the constants in his universe, unmovable and eternal. But even the most tranquil waters can hide treacherous undercurrents. The first hint of change came in the form of a black Mercedes that began appearing outside Ethan's school. One day, as he was leaving with his friends, he noticed his mother sitting in the passenger seat, her head thrown back in laughter. The driver, a man Ethan had never seen before, had one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting casually on the back of Eleanor's seat. "Hey, isn't that your mom?" asked Simon, his best friend since kindergarten. Ethan nodded, a strange unease settling in his stomach. Yeah, must be a friend of hers. But the image lingered in his mind like an unwelcome guest. His mother's easy familiarity with the stranger, the way her hand momentarily brushed against the man's as she reached for something in the car. That night, when Thomas asked Eleanor about her day over dinner, she spoke of a book club meeting and grocery shopping. Not a word about the man in the Mercedes. Ethan waited for her to mention it, but the moment never came, and the omission felt heavier than any lie. "Ethan, honey, you're quiet tonight," Eleanor remarked, her eyes meeting his across the table. He shrugged, pushing his peas around his plate. "Just tired, I guess." "Big test coming up?" Thomas asked, always interested in his son's school life. "Yeah, math. Fractions." The lie slipped out easily, surprising him. Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "Well, if you need help, your father's the numbers guy." Thomas laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "That's right. Though your mother's no slouch with numbers herself. Especially when it comes to shopping budgets." They all laughed, and for a moment, the unease lifted. This was his family, imperfect perhaps, but solid. Whatever he'd seen that afternoon was probably nothing. Adults had complicated lives, friends his parents didn't always mention. It didn't have to mean anything sinister. But over the next few weeks, Ethan noticed other changes. His mother's new perfume, something expensive and heady that she only seemed to wear when leaving the house without them. The hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he walked into a room. The way she checked her phone more frequently, smiling at messages from someone saved simply as J in her contacts. And then there were the arguments. Never before had Ethan heard his parents raise their voices to each other, but now tension crackled between them like static electricity. "You've been distant, Ellie," he overheard his father say one night, after they thought he was asleep. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Thomas. I'm just tired. The charity gala is taking up all my energy." "Is that all it is?" A pause. "What are you implying?" "Nothing. I miss you. It feels like you're somewhere else these days, even when you're sitting right next to me." Ethan crept back to his room, heart hammering. The concern in his father's voice echoed in his mind as he stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. Stars his dad had carefully arranged to match real constellations. The next day at school, he couldn't focus. During lunch, Simon noticed his distraction. "Earth to Ethan," he said, waving a hand in front of his face. "You okay?" Ethan considered telling his friend about the changes at home, about the growing knot of worry in his stomach. But saying it out loud would make it real. "Yeah, just thinking about the baseball tryouts," he lied again, hating how easily the untruths now came to him. When he got home that afternoon, the house was eerily quiet. His mother usually greeted him with a snack and questions about his day. But today, there was only silence. "Mom," he called out, dropping his backpack by the door. No answer. He found her in the master bedroom, hastily wiping away tears as she shoved clothes into a suitcase. "Mom, what's going on?" Panic rose in his throat. Eleanor startled, as if she'd forgotten his existence entirely. "Ethan, you're home early." "No, I'm not. It's the same time as always." He stared at the half-packed suitcase. "Are you going somewhere?" She sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. When he reluctantly joined her, she took his hands in hers. "Ethan, sweetheart, I need to tell you something." Her voice was steady despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. "Your father and we're having some difficulties. I think it's best if we spend some time apart." "You're leaving?" The words felt like stones in his mouth. "Just for a little while. To clear my head." She squeezed his hands. "And you're coming with me. We'll have a little adventure, just the two of us." "But what about Dad? What about school?" "We'll figure all that out." "Your father?" She hesitated. "He agrees this is for the best." Ethan pulled his hands away. "I want to talk to Dad. He's working late tonight. We'll be gone before he gets home." She reached for him, but he stood up, backing away. "That's not fair. You can't just make me leave without saying goodbye." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "Life isn't always fair, Ethan. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. You'll understand when you're older." But Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to understand a world where mothers packed suitcases in secret, and fathers worked late on nights when their families fell apart. "I'm not going," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. Eleanor sighed, her patience visibly wearing thin. "This isn't a negotiation, Ethan. Go pack a bag, essentials only. We leave in an hour." As he reluctantly went to his room, mind racing with confusion and betrayal, the doorbell rang. He heard his mother's footsteps, the door opening, and then a male voice, smooth and authoritative. The same voice he'd heard months ago, asking his mother if she'd thought about his offer. Creeping to the top of the stairs, Ethan peered down to see the owner of the black Mercedes standing in their entryway. Up close, the man was imposing, tall and immaculately dressed, with silver threading through his dark hair, and a watch that probably cost more than his father made in a month. "Is everything ready?" the man asked, his hand resting possessively on Eleanor's lower back. "Almost. Ethan's packing now." She glanced nervously toward the stairs, but didn't spot her son in the shadows. "And Thomas?" "Working late. He won't be home until after 9. The man nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. The jet is fueled and waiting. By tomorrow morning, we'll be sipping coffee on the terrace in Milan." Milan. As in Italy. This wasn't a temporary separation. This was an escape. And somehow, Ethan knew his father wasn't part of the plan at all. He retreated to his room, mind whirling. His mother had lied. His father didn't know they were leaving. And who was this man, with his private jet and promises of Milan? Instead of packing, Ethan did something he'd never done before. He called his father's office. "Richardson Accounting, this is Thomas speaking." "Dad." Ethan's voice cracked. "Ethan? What's wrong, son?" Immediate concern flooded his father's voice. "Mom's packing. She says we're leaving. There's a man here with a Mercedes, and they're talking about going to Milan." A long silence. Then his father's voice, tightly controlled. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. Don't say anything to your mother. Just stall, okay? Pretend you're packing, but take your time." "Okay. And Ethan? I love you, son. Everything's going to be all right." But even at 12, Ethan knew that was a promise his father couldn't keep. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Ethan's young life. He pulled items from his drawers at a glacial pace, folding each shirt with exaggerated care. Twice his mother came to check on his progress, growing increasingly impatient. "Ethan, we need to go. James is waiting." James. So that was his name, the man who was stealing his mother away. He heard the front door open again, and then his father's voice, unnaturally calm. "Going somewhere, Ellie?" What followed was a blur of raised voices and accusations. Ethan crept to the top of the stairs again, watching as his parents faced off in the entryway, with James standing slightly behind his mother, his expression cold and calculating. "You weren't supposed to be home yet," Eleanor said, her composure slipping. "Clearly," Thomas replied. "Were you even going to leave a note?" "I was going to call you once we were settled." "We? So you're taking my son?" "Our son," she corrected. "And yes, he's coming with me. James can provide opportunities for him that you never could." Thomas looked at the other man with undisguised contempt. "And what about what Ethan wants? Did you ask him if he wants to leave his home, his school, his friends?" Children adapt, James interjected smoothly. And he'll have the best education money can buy. Thomas stepped forward, anger flashing in his usually gentle eyes. You don't get to make decisions about my son. You don't even know him. Thomas, please. Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Uglier? Thomas laughed, a harsh sound Ethan had never heard from him before. You're abandoning our marriage, our life together, and you're concerned about appearances? I'm not happy, Thomas. I haven't been for a long time. And you think running away with some rich stranger is the answer? What happened to working through our problems, to the vows we made? Eleanor's face hardened. Vows change. People change. I've outgrown this life, this small-town existence. James understands my ambitions in a way you never could. As they argued, Ethan noticed something strange. His mother kept glancing at her watch, as if waiting for something. And James had positioned himself between Thomas and the door, subtly blocking his exit. Then he saw it, the small glass vial in his mother's hand, something she'd pulled from her purse while Thomas was focused on James. With growing horror, Ethan watched as she uncapped it behind her back, the motion so smooth it would be easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Dad! He cried out, bolting down the stairs. Watch out! But his warning came too late. As Thomas turned toward his son's voice, Eleanor moved with startling speed, flinging the contents of the vial directly into his face. Thomas gasped, inhaling whatever substance had been in the vial, and immediately began to cough violently. What have you done? He choked out, sinking to his knees. Creating our future, Eleanor replied coldly, stepping back as Thomas collapsed completely, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. Ethan tried to run to his father, but James caught him, restraining him with surprising strength. Let me go! Ethan screamed, struggling against the man's grip. Dad! Dad! Thomas's eyes found his son's, filled with confusion and fading consciousness. Ethan! He managed, before his eyes rolled back, and he went terrifyingly still. Is he? James asked, still holding the struggling boy. Eleanor knelt beside her husband, checking his pulse with clinical detachment. Yes. The toxin works quickly. Help me move him to the couch. We need to make this look natural. A heart attack. You killed him, Ethan whispered, shock momentarily stilling his struggles. You killed my dad. Eleanor turned to her son, her expression softening into something almost like pity. Ethan, honey, sometimes we have to make sacrifices for a better life. Your father was holding us back. In time, you'll understand. But Ethan didn't want to understand. He wanted to scream, to fight, to run for help. Instead, he went numb, watching in silent horror as his mother and her lover arranged his father's body on the living room couch, carefully positioning him to look as though he'd fallen asleep watching TV. We need to call an ambulance, Eleanor said, her voice eerily calm. Report finding him unresponsive. Heart attack in his family history makes it plausible. Then, after the funeral, we'll leave, a grieving widow and son starting fresh. James nodded approvingly. Your acting skills will be put to good use, my dear. Ethan felt disconnected from his body, as if he were watching a terrible movie rather than living it. His mother, the woman who had tucked him in at night and bandaged his scraped knees, had just murdered his father in cold blood. And now she expected him to play along with her twisted plan. I'll tell, he said suddenly, his voice small but determined. I'll tell everyone what you did. Eleanor and James exchanged a look before his mother approached him, kneeling to his eye level. No one would believe you, sweetheart, she said softly, brushing hair from his forehead in a grotesque parody of maternal affection. They'll think you're traumatized, confused by grief. And if you persist... She let the threat hang unspoken between them. In that moment, looking into his mother's eyes, Ethan saw something he'd never noticed before. A coldness, a calculation that had perhaps always been there, hidden beneath warmth and smiles. Now, she continued, standing and straightening her clothes, I'm going to call 911. You're going to sit quietly, and when they arrive, you'll say you were doing homework when you heard a thump. You came downstairs and found me trying to revive your father. Do you understand? Ethan said nothing, his silence a small rebellion. Eleanor gripped his shoulders, her nails digging painfully into his skin. Do you understand? She repeated, each word precise and threatening. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Good boy. She released him and picked up the phone, her face transforming as she dialed, voice breaking with artificial grief. Help please, my husband. I think he's had a heart attack. As she performed for the emergency dispatcher, James caught Ethan's eye and placed a finger to his lips, a warning. Then he slipped the emptied vial into his pocket and began tidying the evidence of their hasty departure plans, erasing all signs of what had really happened in the Richardson home that evening. Ethan stood frozen, his world irreparably shattered. In the space of 30 minutes, he had lost his father and discovered his mother was a murderer. Nothing would ever be the same again. And as the distant wail of sirens grew closer, one thought crystallized in his mind. He would not forget what he had witnessed. He would not forgive. Someday, somehow, the truth would come out. He just had to survive long enough to make it happen. Part 2. The Illusion of Grief. The next few days passed in a fog of disbelief and carefully orchestrated mourning. Eleanor Richardson became the town's most pitied widow, beautiful in her grief, strong for her son, graciously accepting casseroles and condolences from neighbors who had no idea of the monster behind her veil of tears. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, just as Eleanor had predicted. Thomas Richardson, beloved husband and father, dead at 42 from an undiagnosed heart condition. No autopsy was requested. Eleanor had tearfully insisted that her husband would have wanted to rest in peace, not be cut up in the name of science. And all the while, Ethan watched, silent and hollow-eyed, as his mother played her part to perfection. "He's still in shock, poor lamb," she would tell concerned friends, stroking Ethan's hair while he fought the urge to recoil from her touch. The therapist says it might take time for him to process his father's death. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, was another person fooled by Eleanor's performance. Ethan had sat through 3 sessions already, saying nothing, knowing that anything he revealed would be reported back to his mother. Sometimes children blame themselves for a parent's death, the therapist had gently suggested during their last session. "Is that what's happening, Ethan? Do you think you could have saved your dad?" He had stared at the box of tissues on her desk, thinking about how he had tried to warn his father, how he had been too late, too slow. But it wasn't guilt silencing him. It was fear and a growing, terrible understanding of his situation. He was trapped, living with his father's murderer, forced to play the role of grieving son while knowing the truth. And soon, according to whispered conversations between Eleanor and James that he'd overheard, they would be leaving Maplewood behind. "The insurance policy pays out next week," his mother had said, her voice low but vibrating with excitement. $2 million, plus the house. "We'll sell, take the cash, and disappear like we planned." "What about the boy?" James had asked. "He's not speaking. That could draw unwanted attention." "He'll adjust. Children are resilient. Once we're settled in Europe, away from all these memories, he'll bounce back." Ethan had no intention of bouncing back or adjusting. Every night, he lay awake plotting his escape, considering whom he might trust with the truth. But who would believe a child accusing his mother of murder? Especially when that mother was Eleanor Richardson, now the tragic widow, her beauty made even more appealing by the hint of vulnerability she strategically displayed. Even Simon, his best friend, had been uncertain when Ethan had tried to hint at the truth. "Your mom?" "No way," Simon had said, eyes wide with disbelief. "She's like the nicest mom ever. You're just angry because your dad died. My cousin was the same when his mom got cancer. Kept saying crazy stuff." After that, Ethan stopped trying. Instead, he began collecting evidence. First, he needed to find the vial, the one James had pocketed after his father collapsed. One afternoon, while his mother was meeting with the insurance agent, Ethan searched the guest room where James had been staying periodically. It took nearly an hour of careful searching, but he finally found it, the small glass container, now empty but possibly still containing trace elements of whatever poison had killed his father. It was hidden in a secret compartment of James's expensive leather toiletry bag, wrapped in a silk handkerchief. Ethan carefully placed it in a Ziploc bag and hid it in his father's toolbox in the garage, a place his mother never ventured. It wasn't much, but it was something. Next, he needed to document the relationship between his mother and James, to prove they had been involved before his father's death. This was harder, as Eleanor was careful to maintain appearances. In public, James was merely Mr. Harrington, an old family friend, who was kindly helping the widow with practical matters. But Ethan had his father's old digital camera, and he began using it. A shot of his mother and James holding hands when they thought no one was watching. Another of them embracing in the kitchen, her head tilted up for a kiss. He downloaded the images to his father's laptop, which Eleanor hadn't yet cleared out, and saved them to a cloud account he created using his father's email. The final piece came unexpectedly. One night, unable to sleep, he crept downstairs for water and overheard his mother on the phone, her voice low and urgent. The detective came back today, she was saying, pacing the kitchen. Asked more questions about Thomas's health history, our marriage. No, I don't think he suspects anything, but someone must have said something. Ethan froze on the stairs, hardly daring to breathe. Of course not, Eleanor continued. The formulation you provided was perfect, untraceable. But this Detective Miller is persistent. A pause. Yes, I've been appropriately grieving. No, Ethan hasn't said anything. He's barely speaking at all. Another pause, longer this time. We can't wait that long. The funeral is tomorrow, and I've already listed the house. I told everyone we need a fresh start, away from the memories. We'll leave next week, once the insurance clears. Paris first, then Milan. Detective Miller. The name burned itself into Ethan's memory. Someone was asking questions, someone who might believe him. The funeral was a blur of black suits and sympathetic murmurs. Ethan stood beside his mother, ignoring her attempts to hold his hand, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone who might be the detective his mother had mentioned. He spotted him easily, a tall man with watchful eyes who stood slightly apart from the mourners, observing rather than participating. When it was time to view the body, Ethan broke away from his mother and deliberately bumped into the detective. Sorry, he mumbled, slipping a folded note into the man's pocket as he steadied himself against him. No harm done, son, Detective Miller replied, his eyes sharp and assessing. You holding up okay? Ethan met his gaze directly for the first time in days. No, he said simply, before his mother appeared at his side, her grip on his shoulder painfully tight. Ethan, darling, it's time to say goodbye to Daddy, she said, her voice honeyed for the benefit of those around them. As she steered him toward the casket, Ethan glanced back to see the detective discreetly checking his pocket, unfolding the note. She killed him. I saw everything. Please help. Ethan Richardson. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, determination, crossed the detective's face before his professional mask returned. He gave Ethan a nearly imperceptible nod before turning away. Hope, small but fierce, sparked in Ethan's chest. Someone might finally believe him. But that hope was shattered the very next day. As Ethan was reluctantly helping his mother pack up the house, a news bulletin interrupted the background radio. Local detective Harold Miller found dead in apparent suicide. Miller, 43, was discovered in his vehicle this morning with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Colleagues report the detective had been struggling with depression following a recent divorce. The coffee mug Eleanor had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her eyes met Ethan's across the room, and in that moment he knew. This was no suicide. And somehow, she knew about the note, about his attempted outreach. Tragic, she said softly, her gaze never leaving his face. How quickly life can change, don't you think, Ethan? The threat was unmistakable. Anyone he turned to would be in danger. He was truly alone now, trapped in a nightmare with no foreseeable escape. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mother appeared in his doorway, her silhouette outlined by the hallway light. We're leaving tomorrow, she announced, her voice eerily calm. The house sold this afternoon, cash offer, no inspection. The new owners take possession next week. Ethan said nothing, but his mind raced. Tomorrow. He had run out of time. I've enrolled you in an international school in Paris, she continued. Beautiful campus, excellent reputation. James has connections there. You'll be welcomed warmly. Still, Ethan remained silent. Eleanor sighed, stepping into the room. This silent treatment has gone on long enough, Ethan. I understand you're grieving, but life goes on. Your father would want you to embrace this new opportunity. At the mention of his father, something snapped inside Ethan. Don't, he said, his voice cracking from disuse. Don't talk about him. Eleanor's expression softened into something almost genuine. He's still with us in spirit, darling. And he'd want us to be happy. Happy. Ethan sat up, rage burning through his numbness. You killed him. You murdered my father for his money and your boyfriend. And now you're pretending to grieve while planning your new life. You're a monster. Instead of denying it, Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed, her face cold and calculating. I did what was necessary. Your father was a good man in his way, but limited. Small-town ambitions, small-town dreams. James and I have larger plans, Ethan. Plans that can include you if you're smart enough to adapt. I'll never be part of your plans, Ethan spat. I'll tell everyone what you did. Eleanor laughed softly. Who would believe you? A traumatized child, acting out after his father's tragic death? Besides, remember what happened to the detective. The world is full of unfortunate accidents, Ethan. She stood, smoothing her silk robe. We leave at noon. Be packed and ready. This is happening whether you approve or not. She paused at the door. And Ethan? I'm your mother. Despite what you think, I do love you. In time, you'll understand why I did what I did. As she left, closing the door behind her, Ethan felt a cold resolve settle over him. He would go with her tomorrow. He had no choice. But this wasn't over. Somehow, someday, he would expose the truth. His father deserved justice, and Eleanor Richardson would eventually pay for her crimes. What Ethan didn't know was how soon that reckoning would come, or the terrible price he himself would pay for it. Click here to watch the second and final part of the story. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more.